So today I want to go over CSS values and units. We already used it before when we did with pixels, when we want to set the height and the width of our checkers board cells. But I want to go over some other types of units that we can use other than pixels. Some of them are relative. I want to explain what they are. And I want to also go over colors. You see down here, where's the colors part? So how to choose colors with CSS. We already did it before, and I showed you an example of black color and this background for the checkers board. But I want to explain more on how to use your own colors other than the predefined colors inside the browser. And again, I'm going to use the Mozilla Developer Network's web docs. I'm not going to read everything, but I'm relying on the content here, and I highly recommend you all go to this website and read some more if you want to have a deeper understanding or to learn more about what I'm talking about in this video. So before showing some code, I want to go over two types of units or sizing units in CSS. One of them is the absolute length units. And this means those are units that we use to display some absolute width or height or spacing of elements. Doesn't depend on the surrounding or some other value. So the only one that I'm going to use is pixels, because I think that the other types of units are rarely used, at least by me. Maybe other people like to use them. I don't see other reasons of using just pixels in your code or relative units. So only in the case if you're using absolute length units. So we're going to focus on that, but feel free to read about the rest and try playing with them. Maybe you'll find good use cases for using them. I just want to keep it simple. So let me go over to VS Code. I will create a new file in HTML, sorry. And again, I'm using the live server extension. You can go over to extensions here and just install the live server. It just will be much easier for you to develop HTML files while using this extension. And if you have this extension installed, just right click and open with live server. Okay, we have our HTML page. Now there is nothing about this inside this HTML, so the browser just completes with the basic HTML. So I'm going to go over here, exclamation mark, enter, and I get my HTML page and fresh, and you see I have this HTML page that I had before. Now, what I'm going to use, it's like we're always using if we have something very general, it's a div. Inside this div, let me add some text here, or Ipsen. Let's do form like that. Delete most of it. I don't want all of this text. I just want a small phrase. I'm going to give it a class. Let me zoom in a little bit. Let's call it, I don't know, let's just call it container for now. We'll have a style tag and container. Now you already saw that, so I can provide height and width. So height will be 100 pixels and width will be, let's say, 70 pixels. Let me go over here, go to the browser, zero it. So there you go, there we have it. You know what, let's zoom in a little bit. So we have it, and we can see, first of all, that the height is 100 pixels, the width is 70 pixels, and if I go to compute it, it also tells me here that the width is 70 over 100 height pixels. So I can always go here to see what is the actual computed size of a given element, and I have some text inside. Now, you see this orange color to the side, because remember, div is display block by default. So it blocks the entire row, even though the width, it's smaller than the entire row. So there is some space after it because I specified some custom width here. It still blocks the entire row. I can also do it for fonts. So I can go over here, let's say font size, and let's do 24 pixels. And you see now the font is a little bit bigger. And if I'll go over here again to compute it, I can see that the font size is 24 pixels, the same as I mentioned in the CSS. So I can also apply pixels to the font size. Now, one very useful relative unit that we can use in CSS is called rem. So I will just use it. I'll do one rem. Okay. Go over here, and you see now that the size is a little bit smaller than 24 pixels. And if I go to compute it, it tells me that the font size is 16 pixels, which is kind of weird. I specified one rem, and if I go to compute it to the actual font size that the browser calculates and prints to the screen, it says 16 pixels. Let me go over to the documentation. We can see that rem is under relative length units. And what is rem? Rem is the font size of the root element. So we need to understand what is the root element. The root element, if we go all up, so this is an element, this is the parent element, and this is the root element. So the HTML tag is the root element. It's the element that holds all other elements. And by default, the font size of an HTML element, even if it's not specified here, but the default font size is 16 pixels. If we go here, font size 16 pixels, nothing changes. But if I would change it, let me do like 20 pixels, you can see that the text here also changes. Or if I make it smaller, see that the text here becomes smaller, and you can even make it smaller than that. So what is rem? Rem is a relative unit, which is relative to the font size of the root element. It's relative to the font size of the HTML element. So one rem, one unit of rem, equals to the size, to the font size of the HTML. So in this case, one rem equals 10 pixels. If I will remove it, because the default font size of an HTML tag is 16 pixels, so one rem will equal 16 pixels. Why is it useful? First of all, we didn't talk about it yet, but when you're doing some responsive UI, you want to have the same code, but to make it behave differently on small screens like smartphones, and you want it to be larger on large screens like desktops. So rem is very useful because we can tell the browser to change just the font size of the HTML element on smaller devices, and then everything else will be changed because it will be relative to this single value. So we won't have to change our entire CSS, we will have to change it only in one place. Another useful, or another reason I see this value useful, because instead of using fine-grained pixel values, which are incremented by 1, you can use relative values and you kind of have the same proportions. So instead of specifying, I don't know, 24 pixels, I can do 1.5 rems. I think it's kind of more intuitive to describe units using something relative and some units which are incremented by the proportion of the thing that we wanted to increment. We want it to be, I don't know, half bigger or 1.5 bigger than the other, or than the default font sizes. So we're using rem for that because it makes our life easier to make things proportional and growing in size or getting smaller in size in the same proportion, other than just having it with pixels and fine-grained pixels and numbers.